read it. Basically, I just rearranged it more academically, so to speak, because I realized I should have done that. But yeah, so I sent you two documents.
When?
First is the research quotes, and then the second one is just the flow. The flow is basically me explaining. Um, the flow is just, the citations of the research that I'm doing. Lah. But let me just share with you the research quotes because I think that will make more sense.
Can?
Okay. All right. So my main struggle is the idea that I have. Uh, how do I fit it into the assignment requirements?
Are you sharing something right now? Because I don't see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm just pressing share. Okay. All right. Oh Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you able to see my Microsoft?
Yes, but can you make it slightly bigger? But because I don't know why every presentation so far it's been quite blurry.
I see.
Yeah. So
So no worries.
brilliant.
All right. Okay. But basically, this is just me checking with you. Is it enough or not? The sources that I have. So yeah, so in trying to fit in my idea into the assignment requirements, I have pushed the questions that I want to explore to the last part of the assignment. Because yes, I think like you said, it is important to break down the foundation first. So yeah, so first one is the Anglo-American schools. So I am using Ramak and Potosi. But then I'm not going to focus too much on the um, Eurocentric schools because that is not what I want to explore further. And then I found a journal article. So there's a lot of great new Chinese researchers about the issue. So yeah, so I found an article that summarized uh, the Eurocentric or the Anglo 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 school, Anglo American school. And then the Eastern school. So because I had a conversation with Donglai as well, we were talking about, there seems to be a lot of comparative literature articles in China. And Donglai said, it's because of Mo Yan winning the Nobel Prize 8 years ago. So she was like, so then, Chinese researchers they have started to um, uh, write it more prominently in their research, in their literature scope. So yeah, so this is the article that I'm going to choose to explain the Eastern school of thought. But basically, the notion of comparative literature, it is very much a Eurocentric thing. And I couldn't find any specific definition for comparative, but there are a few prominent scholars that approach it in a different way because they locate comparative literature within the Chinese language instead of English. And then they also think that the current thinking or the current framework of comparative literature is very much trying to replicate the Western system. Yeah, so that is what they have. And then the methodology, I basically took a book chapter by Tutun Mukherjee, with whom I understand had done a lot of work with Potosi. So yes, so she explained the methodology of the 20th century by Weller Bernheimer. But basically, people uh, uh, trying to expand the scope of comparison, not just looking at literary texts, but also including a lot of other aspects.
Right.
This is interesting because uh, so there's this push and pull with literary because they say we must be contextualizing the text. But at the same time, when we come to the 20th century, the Chinese comparative researchers, they are saying, no, we must go back to literary element because this context, this element of politics and societies are just too fraught. So I'm like, okay, there's a lot of push and pull there. Lah. So yeah, so I think Mukherjee mentioned it really well. When you say because she mentioned, literature was studied as a discourse.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that really interesting. Lah. So in the 21st century, because there's this boom of the millennium. So yeah, so she mentioned feedback, and then Mukherjee also she had her own approaches. She defined this term that I find really interesting that I would like to mention: new literary order, and also the notion of eccentricity, basically comparative literature to move itself globally. But as I'm reading the article, she's basically, I don't know, I feel like she's taking what she understood from the Western side of comparative literature, but just adding more sensitivity into the reading. Basically, trying to make the reading of the text more equal compared to less equal. I am not sure if, I mean, where should I place Mukherjee? Does she represent uh, the Anglo-American side of comparative literature, or does she present the other side of comparative literature? Because I do understand that she was trained in the Anglo side. So yes, but I do think that it is very important because I think her and Spivak are considered to be part of the post-colonial movement as well, which is considered another element than the East Asian, China, Japan, Korean side. Okay, all right. So that is the methodology that I'm going to mention. And then, so aside from like, the methodology for 20th century and the 21st century, I also would like to add is the third category that is not mentioned in the requirements, Eastern methodologies, because the article added a few. So the article that I found, the researcher mentioned what the comparativists in China have been doing, basically trying uh, to suggest classical Chinese literary theory and Western poetics, they can be compatible, and then they wish to add their perspective so that heterogeneity can be promoted instead of this homogeneous thing. So they want to localize the Western theory into their literature, not them trying to penetrate the Western-centric center.
Repeat that again.
Yes.
Heterogeneity can be promoted how?
Okay, so
By
heterogeneity can be promoted
localizing.
by localizing Western theory into Chinese literature. Does it make sense, Doctor?
No, I mean this is what you are finding. These are your
Yes.
critical review. So this is not your hypothesis. Rather, this is what
Yes.
they are suggesting through their own
Yes.
research. So you have to report what you're reading. So yeah.
Yes. All right. So yes, basically, I think in terms like for now, based on my reading, only well, can I say this? Because Chinese is the second biggest language in the world other than English. So they have kind of like developed or started to develop their own discipline of comparative literature. But the thing is, they also disagree. I'm not sure if I put it here or not. They also disagree with the term the Chinese school of thought or the Eastern school of thought, because that is just a Eurocentric way of saying all Chinese literature can be put under one umbrella, or all Eastern school can be put under one umbrella. So they also have problems with such labeling as well. Yes. So they are basically a lot of the non-Western scholars. They are basically providing an alternative or a counter. How to say this? A counter view as to what we understand to be the world literary system. So that is what I want to push for in my video essay. What are the counter voices of the among the scholars when it comes to this? All right. So yeah, so there's this variation theory that you shared with us last week. So I found it in another article. So yeah, so I think the variation theory is very famous, and then I think this Chun Ting Chow, the scholar, I would like to get to know more about him. Okay, so that is the Eastern methodology. All right. And so the bulk of my interest and what I would like to explore is the current state of comparative literature based on the critical essays identified. So actually, I have so I have four parts for this. Let me just okay. Wait. So I have four parts. Uh, 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 four subsections. What is the current state? So taking from Spivak and Basnet's idea, competitive literature must change or else they will experience impending death. So a lot of the Western scholars have said the next step to go is world literature. So only after reading further that I realized world literature came to the forefront, supposedly to somewhat uh, give a new direction for comparative literature. So this is how I'm gonna move from comparative and then hopefully make my argument on world literature relevant to the assignment. So the first one is deviation from literary focus. I'm just gonna go through it. Then second one is the advent of world literature, and then okay, this is quite long. And then the third one is peripheral burden, and then the last one is where is it? Where is it? An alternative to the center periphery narrative. So let me just explain it one by one, what I understand in my reading. So the deviation from the literary focus. So this is just me repeating, and the scholars are saying that uh, the deviation from literary focus, the inclusion of sociological, socio-political, geopolitical aspects of literature, they cannot seem to stand anymore. So I would like to include that. And then the advent of world literature. So I found this article by another Chinese scholar. So he is basically arguing that world literature as a some sort of a discipline to save comparative literature, it is a Western notion. It is accepted mostly by Western scholars, but he himself disagreed that world literature is sustainable, which I find very interesting. So what he did was he basically uh, deconstruct Damrosch's definition of world literature, uh, because Damrosch is the definition is very much dependent on this acceptance by foreign cultures. The crux of the argument is uh, in comparative literature, there is negotiation. But most of the time, we do notice that the negotiation between two cultures, the center and the periphery, they are of inequality. So yes. So I will be mentioning, so problems with world literature. So the scholar in the article basically said, uh, it is what is it that I learned from Dr. Chan's class? Basically, you're just giving another name. It's word literature, but then how is it more transformative than comparative literature? And then there's uncertainty in the definition because a lot of scholars, but there is no consensus on what word literature exactly means, and it is still very homogeneous. And number five, I'm really interested in this: the standards of determining which literary works can be taken as world literature. Uh, so it still lie in the hands of Euro and US authorities. And then yes, so then he quoted this scholar, Egyptian professor, I think, called Magdi Yusuf. So I would like to put that as well. And then there's also translation. I would love to put translation. I'm not sure if I have enough space. Because Apter is another scholar that talks a lot about how translation is always on the periphery, and there's always this uh, assumption that word literature, the novel should be able to be translated. So yes. So then again, this article also suggested suggested a solution for this word literature lack of clarity, and then yeah. So it wishes to introduce literariness back into the study. Uh, but the thing is, I have not done a lot of reading on this uh, push and pull with literariness uh, and how it theoretically impacts the reading of the text. Yes. Okay. All right. So they are, and then there's also Tutu Mukherjee lah. So Tutu Mukherjee uh, talk about the potential of word literature, but also there will be problems with it as well. So she quoted Spivak, uh, who also said that there is a way to analyze world literature or to manage world literature, but not uh, from a forensic gaze. I suppose when they say forensic, it is always the Eurocentric gaze. So yes. All right. And then the third one is peripheral burden. Okay, so I hope you're still with me, Doctor. Okay, so the peripheral burden is the thing that I'm most interested in. So I found this article by Carolina Watroba. So she is, I think, an Eastern European scholar. She's trained in the European School of Thought, but she addressed this article. So there are these. 10 years ago, there are these two white writers, British writers, Tim Parks, who had labeled famous writers like Murakami and Orhan Pamuk as producers of the dull new global novel. So this is Western critics saying that why are these non-Western novels so famous? Basically, they are saying that writers like Orhan Pamuk and Murakami choose to write in a way that is appealing to the Western readers and at the same time sacrificing the uniqueness of their culture. So that is the argument of this Western critics. So there are two main traits of this uh, new global novel. First, they must be written by non-Western authors, but then they became very successful. And then the second one, the books are eminently translatable. Basically, these Western critics are accusing the writers, okay, since you know the formula of how to make it successful, then just write it in a way that can easily be understood and translated and understood for your English readers. All right, so the back of Things Park's argument is here. So yeah, so it's a lot about so the critics I very interesting for me because the scholar here, the researcher here, she linked the argument of the critics to Frederick Jameson. So Frederick Jameson, actually I found a lot about this guy because he is a very renowned scholar, but he is also of the view that non-Western literature can never be as canonical or as good as Western literature, say Joyce or Proust. So yeah, so apparently this thinking about non-Western literature will never be as good as the Western ones. It has its root in scholarly research as well. Yeah, so most of it is just the scholar, the researchers rebut. So the researcher here is Watroba. So she's rebutting the assumptions of the Western critic here. All right. And over here, this is Tim Parks basically saying for it to be a good novel, it should be hard to translate. It shouldn't be easily translatable or shouldn't be easily relatable. And then what Robert said, that is very Eurocentric because who decides what can be translated? Who decides what gets to be chosen? So it's usually the academic elite who can usually understand the difficult style, supposedly, or the cultural context of the novels. So yes. And then what I love about her article is that other than her own rebuttal against this Western critic, she also included other scholars like Spivak, because Spivak said, of course, there is always uh, exchange between the center and the periphery, but uh, you can win the writers on the periphery. They cannot but to be influenced by the culture of the center because it has always been one-sided. Uh, for example, Spivak actually gave this illustration. The Nepalese villages, we can be influenced by the West, but the West is very much rarely influenced by us. And then also, Pankaj Mishra said that non-Western authors cannot write outside the process of globalization for the simple reason that their local cultures have already been altered by this very process. So when there are Western critics who accuse non-Western writers of compromising our cultural identity, so yes, so I mean, of course, we cannot help but to do that since we have been colonized and influenced in an unequal manner. And then there's Homi Baba, and then there's also Rebecca Walkowicz. Lah. So I do love this article because it is very detailed, and it does address the unequal relationship between like this, I don't know, this binary opposing sides, which I believe is constructed by the Eurocentric scholars anyway. Okay, and then this is just Watroba mentioning what is good literature and what is good literature. So basically, she is addressing that it is still very much controlled by the Eurocentric. I mean, they decide who gets to be admitted in world literature. But basically, when there are writers who manage to break into basic popular culture, why are they criticism? So she argues that in her conclusion, let me just jump to it. Okay, an uneasiness towards non-Western literary production. So I do love this uneasiness toward non-Western literary production, because it has been mentioned that English novels, relatable or not, no one argues their deserving, their, how to say this, their sense of deserving to be in the canon. But for non-Western, there seems to be this double standard. Yes. And then the last one is the last one. I'm not sure if it's related or not, but I just would like to put it in the video as an alternative to the center periphery narrative. So Park So Won, she's Korean. Yeah, she's Korean. She's teaching in one of the UK uni. I think she's teaching in Oxford or Cambridge, but one of the very renowned universities over there. So instead of looking at the West and the rest in the center periphery models, she actually studied literature during the Japanese colonization of Korea and China. So I mean, she did say we cannot think about world literature without including the Western context, but she actually introduced uh, this Pan-Asian empire, meaning there are other centers aside from the Europe one in our history. If we dig enough, we can find the existence of center periphery model anywhere in the world where colonization has happened. But what is the problem? Why are these not talked enough? It is because there is little direct exchange between world literature and East Asian literary studies. So I find that very interesting. And I would like to include that as well because it provides this counter narrative. World literature is not always centered in Europe or in America or what is accepted over there. Even among us, Asia, we are so vast and there are different languages. There is still this uh, hierarchy of power because East Asian and post-colonial are considered different. And among East Asian themselves, there have been powers colonizing other countries. So yes, all right. So yeah, when you talk about that, I find that yes, I would like to include that because it does, as Park So-won said, undermines the idea that peripheral writers over here must always reach Europe and must always be included in their circulation, considered as world literature. So yes, so that is all I have, Doctor. So I put my argument in the argument here just to make sure that I have a bit of focus to go to when I'm doing my assignment too. But yeah, so that's all I have. I'm not sure if that's clear enough. Okay, should I stop sharing?
No, this is fine. Leave it as is. No, go back to
Okay.
your thesis. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Um, I think what we need to draw from this presentation, what you need to kind of look at your own the research that you have done. You do read a lot. You do read extensively, and that is a plus point. And you need to kind of sustain that. That voracious attitude towards reading, you need to sustain that, and you will find that you are in the right program doing this research. So that's number one. So you love reading and you love to digest other people's thoughts, and you love to kind of unpack what they are saying and putting it down into arguments. You like that. That's brilliant. And you know which bits appear to be valuable in the argument. You understand that. You can see it, you can look at it, you can unpack that. Now the next step in that growth cycle, if you like, is to be able to look back at all your notes and at all your readings and develop a critical argument. Okay, so you've got here the argument. Let me read it. To be considered part of world literature, a work of peripheral literature has the burden to provide universal values that can be accepted by the Western audience, while at the same time retaining features of its cultural and historical roots. How does this argument connect to comparative literature? That part is still missing.
Okay.
Okay. But there was something you said in your presentation just now. I was looking through your notes trying to find where it was. This is about 2/3 into the presentation. You said one of the primary focus of the Chinese school of comparative literature, or rather the scholars from the Chinese universities of the literature departments, is, quote, promoting heterogeneity by localizing Western theory into the reading of Chinese literatures. So if I wanted to focus on that thesis, okay, if I wanted to focus on that thesis of how comparative literature in the 21st century, as seen by scholars from the Chinese literature departments, the thesis is to promote heterogeneity rather than promote commonality, promote homogeneity. The Chinese school, or rather the Chinese departments, rather the literature departments in the Chinese universities appear to promote heterogeneity. How? By localizing Western theory into the reading of Chinese fictions. But is that still comparative literature? And that's why you need to understand the definition of comparative literature from the very beginning. So at the start, comparative literature is reading text across geographical borders, across time and space, across cultures. So you know the definition, or across national literary canon. So that definition needs to be kept in check. Whatever we're talking about, we need to come back to that definition. So what is the thesis here? So the argument still needs to be further tightened in order for it to relate to the question. The question is still asking you about doing a critical review of comparative literature in the 21st century by bringing in scholars from the 21st century and their positionality. So based on what you have given just now, some of the things that I am picking up, the second half of your presentation, you focused on 4 themes. One is the deviation from the literary focus. Second is
Mm.
the advent of world literature. Third is the peripheral burden. And fourth is the alternative to center peripheral narrative. Okay, even these four themes, ask yourself, what am I saying about the state of comparative literature in the 21st century? That is the statement that you need to develop on your own, right? So
Okay.
you have the strength of, your ability to read critically, your ability to analyze what you have read, the ability to kind of like identify which bits are relevant for your purpose. Now develop the ability to conceptualize in your mind, based on what you have read, a thesis as well as a kind of methodology in arguing that thesis. So for instance, if you are suggesting that scholars appear to suggest that comparative literature in the 21st century needs to promote a heterogeneous approach to the reading of literature, how does this quote unquote heterogeneity come across? Does it come across in text selection? Does it come across in the approach to the reading of text? Does it come across in the widening or diversification of corpus? One of the things that you said in your write-up was that literariness is no longer the only object of comparative literature. So if literariness is not the only object, what else appears to be the object of comparative literature? So what I'm suggesting is have a look at your own writing, reflect and deconstruct what you have written, and find the themes, the emerging themes from your own writing. And from those emerging themes, look back and say, what exactly am I saying? What's that one statement that I want to make? So it's now time for you to reflect on what you have read in order to be able to produce a thesis that will allow you to say all these things. Because
All right.
otherwise, the reader is not sure where you're taking us in this journey across all these articles. Each article appeared to suggest something unique. But the focus of the
Mm.
assignment is not to talk about separate articles. The purpose of the assignment is for you to be able to demonstrate what you have figured out based on other people's works. What have you critically thought through, right? Based on the readings you have done, that allows you, that informs you, this is the state of comparative literature in the 21st century. Okay?
Right.
What are the critiques in fact suggesting? So look through what you have identified, some of which might not be important for the video essay, some of which might be
Oh,
too historical, some of which might be too focusing on world literatures, the argument about world literature. So bits and pieces that are not relevant, you may put that aside. But ask yourself, look through your notes. No more reading other stuff. Just look through your own notes and ask yourself, if there's one argument that I can pull as a thread from this entire 13 pages of notes, if there's one argument that I can pull out of this that somehow unifies everything that I want to say, what is that one argument? That comparative literature has evolved since the 20th century? And if so, in what form is it presented now? Then you bring in
all right.
you can bring in Mukherjee, you can bring in all these other scholars, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
All
do notice
the
the lack of connection between them. I mean, they support what I want to present, but I have not formed a concrete sentence yet.
Okay, but that's part of the process. So I'm not saying you've done it wrong. I'm saying this is part of the process. You are reading each article critically, you're engaging with each article critically. Now you have to ask yourself, how are they connected? What's the conversation that's happening between them that they might not realize, right? what's happening between Article 1, 2, and 3 if I stepped back and see the connection. So there might
All
be
right.
some things that they are saying that needs to be muted because it's not relevant. What Park is saying about Orhan Pamuk's work,
Good.
it might not be
Yeah.
relevant to the argument, right? So that can be muted. And what Spivak is saying, how relevant is it? If it is relevant, what is the thesis that you are arguing for? Right?
All
So
right.
so this bit that you have highlighted, every text can be seen as participating in a cultural discourse. How is that relevant to your bigger picture? So right now I'm asking you to look at your own notes and tell us what's the bigger picture that you want to paint about this conversation. Is there hegemony? Is that what you want to discuss? That when we talk about
Mm,
comparative literature, from the discipline to the corpus selection to the methodology, what you see is the politics of the hegemonic politics of the dominant and the peripheral. That until that hegemony is broken or until the hegemony is equalized, this conversation will always be lopsided. Is that the argument? Then go forth and prove that. So this is when you get to bring in the lawyer and the law school training. No, for real. So
yes.
people might not realize that when you are arguing for a case through your literary works, your essays and whatever, you need that exercise of reading other people's thoughts, reading the document, synthesizing it, and then having a statement and arguing for or against that statement. That's exactly what you all do as lawyers, right?
Mm,
So bring that skill, you've got that skill set, now bring that in. The problem, Ruby, what I see is you're interested in a lot of things,
uh,
which is not a problem to me. But for the purpose of the assignment, you need to be able to say, you know what, I can't bring everything in. I'm going to save it for some other context for another assignment. So for today's purpose, for this particular assignment, what do you want to say? What's the thing that you want to kind of argue for? Make it broad enough that you can bring in as many of the issues that you have highlighted, right? But
yes.
focus it so that it brings the audience to a conclusion a lot easier. Right now you're saying so many things, but in the end, what's the conclusion? So I sometimes work backwards. I would actually decide what I want to conclude after this presentation.
Mm,
What is my conclusion? Then from that conclusion, develop a thesis statement. I notice with a lot of us, a lot of students especially, they have a kind of a good enough thesis, not very strong. They have that, but their conclusion is really strong. So I would say, okay, look at your conclusion. Look at what you are trying to prove, through your conclusion. So whatever you are saying in your conclusion, develop that into a thesis. Then the connection becomes clearer. So your notes are fine. You've highlighted key ideas. Like, for instance, the uncertainty in the definition, the focus on homogeneity and the importance of heterogeneity, but convert the arguments not so much towards world literature, but more towards comparative literature, which
all
is the
right.
bigger umbrella. Of course, comparative literature takes into consideration national literature, world literature, and the evolution, the continuous evolution of world literature. It takes into consideration. But don't speak about it as if you are arguing for or against world literature. Speak about it as if you are looking at the evolution of comparative literature.
Okay.
Okay?
There's a lot
Okay?
clearer, Doctor. Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
don't listen to each author. Don't go with Mukherjee and so on and so on. No, it shouldn't be in that chronology. It should be you deciding what are the important issues. For instance, if you are going to go with promoting heterogeneity amongst the reading of literature in comparative literature of the 21st century, first thing to do is, what does that mean? What does heterogeneity imply? Number two,
Mm.
how? How are you going to promote heterogeneity? So you talked about widening the corpus, you talk about further diversification. How will that further diversification take place? That's when you bring in the peripheral literature, also the alternative perspective, not just center peripheral narrative, but what else? So this is how you do it. Okay, so your take is original, and that take is citable. People can cite you by the way you have argued the case, not because your work is original, but the way you're looking at it, the perspective you're taking is original. So sometimes even a literature review work can be converted into a journal article. It doesn't have to be original research before you can submit as a journal paper. A journal publication can also be a review paper, and that's what you're doing. But the skill that you need to harness and sharpen further is the ability to figure out for yourself, what exactly am I wanting to say? And what I am wanting to say is something others are not saying yet. Okay, so
All right.
that takes a little bit more practice for sure. But once you've got that, you're constantly looking at it from, what am I seeing that others are not seeing? What am I able to see here? So it becomes an occupational hazard, in fact, you know. It's not a hazard, but like
Yeah.
when you're watching a movie, when you're listening to a song, when you're reading a book, when you're reading a journal article, they're saying all these things, but you are able to see something else. And this is what Pierre Macheret talks about, the silences or the unsaid, you know, things that people are not
Oh,
really saying. I will
is
talk
it a
about
gap?
that.
Is it a gap? I understand it as a gap.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next week in our first parameter. But yes, because that's the skill we need to develop as literary critique. So it's not so much about what the author is doing or not doing for me, right? Be it Pamuk, whoever it is that you are reading. It's not so much what he is trying to say or do in his narrative, but what I see, or what I see that he's not doing enough of, what I see he's not saying enough about, right? The same with the articles that
Yes.
you're reading. So you're reading a lot of different things that the authors are saying, but if you put it all together, because you chose these articles for a reason, right? So there must be
Yes.
something about these three articles that kind of, there is a uniformity in terms of their argument. They seem to be heading in the same direction. What is that direction? They seem to be making, they seem to be informing you about something similar. What is that? What is that aspect that they seem to be informing you about? So I hear the element of heterogeneity, homogeneity, that kind of binary. I heard you said push and pull a
Yes.
couple of
Yes.
times.
I am.
So
I am
this,
getting that as well. Yeah.
so you know, a working title, if you like, that you may probe, push and pull with literary engagement across time and space. Okay, so how would you argue the
Push and
case
pull.
for the push and pull of literary engagement across time and space? What has been the push and pull of literary engagement in the 20th century across time and space? So that across time and space component is the comparative literature. If it's just world literature, you're
Mm.
just reading the text for itself. But the minute you say comparative literature, you cannot read a text in isolation. You have to read the text side by side. So when we're discussing the element or the theme of push and pull in literary engagement across time and space, how is it different? in the 20th century compared to the 21st century? Maybe in the 20th century, the literariness was the primary object. How about in the 21st century? Maybe in the 20th century, the text, the corpus selection was not very wide because of the definition of world literature being focused too much to the Eurocentric domain. The 21st century, the corpus has further widened. And with the widening of the corpus, the element of diversification comes in. So suddenly you have an argument, right? So it's not so much who is saying what, it's about Ruby and her opinion. And her opinion is the literary engagement. Okay, I'm repeating myself. The literary engagement across time and space, there is this element of push and pull. So who is making the push and pull now? Previously, it was very much the center. So now, the scholars coming from outside the center. Right? Mukherjee was from Hyderabad University. And then you've got scholars coming from the Chinese universities. So the element of push and pull is no longer Western-centric anymore. So suddenly you have an argument. You have a point that you are raising. And all this is coming from you, based on your reading and based on your deconstruction of what you have read. So that's the skill that we are developing here throughout the course, not just for your first assignment. Throughout the course, I am getting all of you to develop your opinion, your critical opinion, informed by either the reading of articles or later by the reading of fiction, works of fiction. But at the end of the day, that's the skill set that you are all developing. What is your opinion? What is your take? So critical skills, critical thinking, creative critical thinking, and communicative skills, that's the core. Basically, at the end of the day, that's what you're all practicing again and again and again and again. And you realize how challenging it is to have a mind. You know, when you say to people, you know, have an opinion. And here you are being challenged with that because you're reading all these awesome journal articles and you're overwhelmed with what they are telling you, but you're forgetting to stop and ask yourself, okay, they're telling me all these things, but what do I think about it? What have their opinions told me? How has it informed me? What do I want to say back to them? If I am given 10 minutes to rebut, you know, as a debater, if I'm given 10 minutes to rebut, you're telling me all these wonderful things, fine. Okay, this is my rebuttal. So that's at the core, that's what I'm asking from this assignment. Okay, all right. So I know it is very much still an abstract concept, but the minute you all put it into practice and conduct the task at hand, the idea, the abstract idea begins to be translated into a skill. And it's not going to be a completed skill that you have developed completely overnight. It will be something that you are going to keep working on, you know? But
yes,
that's the
I have to.
Yeah, because I'm not expecting all of you to kind of have this aha moment and suddenly be able to, you know, eureka, and you've got your skill sets developed and you can graduate. No, that's why it takes you all these semesters to kind of just hone in on that, keep practicing. Every course that you take, ultimately that's what we're getting you to do. Whether you're reading Western literature or Malaysian literature or Eastern other aspects of literature, you know, with different themes, at the end of the day, that's what you're practicing.
Yeah.
Okay? But I appreciate the fact that you have read extensively. So now no more reading for this assignment, I'm saying. No more reading. Just look at your own notes. Look at your own notes. This is time for reflection. Look at your own notes and look at your bits that you have highlighted. The things that you have highlighted is your subconscious mind intuitively telling you, okay, this is important, this is important, this is important. Now ask yourself, how are they connected? How they connected.
Okay.
And have the courage to say, okay, these things are also important, but they don't gel. So I'm gonna mute this for another assignment. This will come in later. Do you understand?
All right.
Don't feel
Yes.
like I have to say everything because I've read and I've made all these notes. No. Then it becomes messy, and then your argument doesn't hold water anymore because you are losing the audience. At the end of the purpose is always about your readers or your audience. So in the case of a video essay, you have an audience to think about. So it's not so much what have I figured out, it's more about how am I going to convey what I have figured out to my audience. Because we have to think about our audience. Otherwise, the argument is pointless. You have figured it out in your mind. Now, the challenge is to convey it, communicate it.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Okay. That is a lot clearer because I was thinking about, okay, there are just too many things to say. Uh, but
But
yes,
like I
I will
told
try.
you, but like I told you in our last consultation, you can use this so much. You can use a bulk of this as an introduction for your seminar assignment and another
Mm.
bit for your final project. So yeah,
So yes, but I always consider when I'm making research for anything that I can always use it. But the purpose of today is also to just perhaps link to the assignment two as well. Some of the
yeah.
things I hope to also explore, like continue to explore more. But yes, but I now understand assignment one. There must be a solid thesis that they must the thesis they must string things together.
Yep.
Okay, so I think yes, I will look back because there are 13 pages of it. Yes, I do also agree with you that there is something here that I have not grasped yet.
But seriously, this is exactly how it be it a PhD thesis, a master's thesis, a project paper, a 20% assignment. This is exactly the journey that you read extensively, you identify different things, and then you figure out what you have thought about. That's the missing link. In a lot of our work, a lot of people they show readership, scholarship, but they don't show their engagement with what they have read. That's the missing link. The minute you figure that out, you are able to apply it in every context. Every assignment that you do is a piece of you being explored. It's a piece of your critical creative mind being demonstrated. Seriously, it becomes awesome when you put your repertoire of work later, you know, the assignments you've done, the
Yeah.
publications. So when you put that, it's like, okay, this is a reflection of what's gone on in my mind over the course of X number of months or weeks or years or whatever. So that's the link that you want to kind of try to make between what you're reading and how you're developing it. What do I think about it? What do I think about what I am reading? And how do I transfer that into writing, into seminar presentation, into a video essay, into any other format? The format is something else, but what I have figured out, and that's something I am also constantly sharpening with every student that I meet. So somebody I'm meeting now compared to somebody I met 10 years ago, a student I met 10 years ago, it's different. So every one of you're bringing in your unique interests and your perspective. So I am having to exercise my ability to relate to what you're interested in back to the academic exercise. It means, okay, you're interested in all these things, but how do I tie it back to the academic exercise of presenting it to your audience? So that's a skill
Yes.
that I am developing as well. So I'm having fun with every one of your consultations, all of you together as well as individually. So together, hopefully, we will continue to have an understanding of what's really going on up here. When we're reading all these things, what's really going on up here? And that's the original take that you want to be heard, to have other people view in. Okay?
All right. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm gonna stop sharing now.
All right. And
Yes, it has been great, Doctor. The consultation and the classes and my course mates as well.
Alhamdulillah, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
all of you are quite unique. You all are bringing your A game. So I'm quite happy with your collective performance as well as your individual performance. So I hope you all learn from each other as much as from the class. I hope you're also learning from each other, because the community of learners is as valuable as you individually learning on your own.
Yes.
Okay?
But yeah, but it is interesting that you mentioned about my readership, because yes, because in my background, in law, you just have to absorb much information as you can. So yes, but stringing them together, now I can feel the transition into
Yeah.
being a literary, a novice literary scholar. So yes, so
Yes.
it is very interesting for me, my process also.
And
All
can you
right.
imagine where you can go with this skill set later? You can start to transfer this into so many different disciplines and so many different
Yes.
fields, as a professional. So yeah, that's the hope.